Welcome to the Daily Apple. I'm your host, Kevin White. Emma Ryan and I will dive into all topics related to the science of longevity, along with some other subjects we just find of interest, with the hopes to provide useful information for everyone. This stems from my personal interest to optimize the human condition, to not just live longer, but to live better. Well, hey, Mary.
Hey, good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. It's good to see you too. Just kind of a conversation, and I really appreciate you making time today. And haven't seen you for a while since I've talked to you. You went to Italy.
I went to
Right?
Italy. Yeah. We were in Italy when life's been crazy because we just moved this past weekend too,
Yeah,
and so we've been on the go. But yeah, Italy was amazing. It's really
yeah,
beautiful. What
yeah.
about you?
Nowhere, nothing, just stuff. But anyway, it's good to see you. But thanks for making time for this.
Of
I've been.
course. I'm excited to chat.
So yeah, just to tell everyone a little bit about you before I even get into that. So I'm going to the AGE meeting, right? And in Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, which I've never been. And the first time I went, we talked about this before, was here locally in Oklahoma
Yep.
City. They had an annual meeting here, and I went, and thinking it was, a great meeting and everything, but it's much different than any of the meetings we usually go to, because these are all the frontline PhDs and postdocs making the real
Yeah.
discoveries and everything, the stuff that we act on and stuff. So so I was the only clinician at that point and just trying to suck up all this information. But so I'm going to this meeting in Madison, and they have that, global texting app where you can communicate and see what all is going on. And we're landing the plane, and I'm sitting there, and I just log into that, and I see somebody say, "Are there any other clinicians here?" And it was you. And I thought, I'm not the only one. That's great. So, and then I started looking you up, and saw your Instagram page, and of most note, the rapping one I was impressed with. So people should check
Yeah.
that out.
Dropping
But
bars for sure.
But yeah, so it was great to see you. And so the thing that struck me about you, and the reason I really wanted to connect too, is that to be a good clinician, you kind of have to be a lifelong learner. The student thing never goes away, right? So you were just there, just, sponging up as much information as you could, which kind of, gave me some respect for who you are and everything. So,
Yeah,
but
right
so,
back at
yeah,
you.
yeah, well, thanks. So it was fun, but yeah, Madison, Wisconsin. So
Of all places, I know. We got to experience cheese curds though. So what else can you ask for?
I wasn't going to bring that up, but since you
Oh
brought
yeah,
it
I just
up,
outed us. I outed us to the longevity community.
so tell me, I mean, you've got a lot of information out there in the interwebs and everything. So I would encourage people to check it out. I've done some looking at it, and you've done this. You create a lot of good educational material online, which I think is useful. And then you do modern medical, right? And then
Yep, that's my practice locally in LA.
the other platform you do for what's the other platform there for that you do courses and everything?
I have some courses with Commune is the name of the company, and they're a course platform for health teachers, but also they do like yoga and they talk about sustainability. So it's kind of like a catch-all for people who are interested in just continuously learning from people.
Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, so take me through you and kind of a little bit about your path and your story and your career history, and because it's a little bit different, and people in this space do a lot of GI stuff, but you were actually working with a gastroenterologist during a significant part of your career. So just take me through all that.
Yeah. So I'll even go back to pre-medical school and everything where the thing that got me into this field was my own personal journey where as a child, I had GI issues and was constantly in seeing either primary care or saw a gastroenterologist. I had a colonoscopy, endoscopy, all at a pretty young age, and no one really had what I thought were answers for me, which is what I was looking for at the time. And ended up seeing acupuncturists and herbalists and eventually saw a naturopathic doctor. And I was really just impressed with her knowledge base. And now looking back, I was really impressed with her bedside manner, I think most of all, in terms of how she talked to me, how much time she spent with me. And so I shadowed a few more naturopathic doctors. I was like, I think this is what I want to do because allopathic medicine hasn't helped me yet. And I have quotes around that for a reason, which I'll circle back to. And so I went and did my training in naturopathic medicine. And I don't even think I knew at the time. There's a huge overlap. The basic sciences are obviously all the same, right? And it's only when you get to like the herbal medicine part that things become a little bit different there. But we also learned a ton about nutrition, and nutrition was my undergraduate, and I was really interested in using food and how we could incorporate that into healing. Long story short, I ended up fixing my GI issues, but it wasn't how I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to find like the one answer. And I even did like the functional medicine training, and I was looking for like that parasite, or I was
Mm.
looking for like the leaky gut test to be off, and then you fix it, and then like there's fireworks and you feel better. And that wasn't it for me. And it really shaped how I have become as a clinician because I went through all of the things myself where I was, definitely in the category of orthorexia, where I was obsessed with health and healthy eating. I had an eating disorder in my teenage years into college as well. And so I've dealt with a lot of the things that I have patients now that are dealing with. And in that journey, I worked with a gastroenterologist for a couple of years, and he's incredibly intelligent guy. I learned a ton from him and really started to appreciate the allopathic world again. And I think I needed all of that to kind of form who I was going to be as a clinician. And I think I'm still forming it, right? I think that we continuously learn and change and pivot based on all of our experiences. Um, but it's really brought me to where I am today, where I help a lot of people with chronic GI issues, especially irritable bowel syndrome, chronic constipation, inflammatory bowel disease, and things like that. And we can kind of go through some of it today with how my beliefs have completely shifted through that journey. And it's helped me. And so my goal is to help some other people along the way.
Mhm. So what kind of issue? Tell me more about your issues you were having. Let's just
Yeah,
as
let's go in. I'm super public about it. So
personal about that.
yeah, yeah, let's talk about your bowel issues on a podcast. No, I talk about this all the time. So I had chronic constipation as a child,
Yeah.
and it was pretty severe. I was really uncomfortable. It also went along with reflux that would come. And so I was constantly having an indigestion and reflux and chronic constipation, and then developed small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so a lot of like bloating and discomfort. And I really think what was missing in my care was just somebody who was stable and grounded and like continuously could see me. I didn't have a relationship with a practitioner that, other than my primary care for sure. But I remember like seeing one doc and then maybe see another and kind of would jump around.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably a big piece of it. But the other part that I said was really missing is I was never really formally diagnosed with anxiety. And I think that if that had been diagnosed and I had a practitioner to help me through it, I think that probably would have ended up helping just my GI issues in general.
So what did you do about that?
Yes, I mean, I eventually figured it out in my 20s and started to deal with it, and saw a therapist, saw a psychiatrist, have been on medications a couple of times, and took up meditation and mindfulness and kind of dove into the world of mental health in various angles and figured out what worked for me and what didn't work for me. Um, And I think that was part of me like really pushing back against allopathic medicine, but it's not the downfall of allopathic medicine. It was really just that I I hadn't been diagnosed and hadn't been treated, and honestly don't even know if I would have been open to it if somebody had come to me at the age of 18, 19 and been like, I think this is a little bit of anxiety. I would have been like, yeah, F you. Because I was definitely of that mindset. um, but looking back on it, we can say hindsight 2020.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a, I mean, and we don't have to get much into the poop stuff. I was really interested about how you approach all that and everything with your patients. And as far as I'm concerned, people can go and, I mean, you've got a ton of stuff out there with other podcasts you've been on, and you give a lot of really good information. But that's such a huge thing, constipation with with women. And I
Mhm.
mean, my experience has been a lot of, it's been a lot of, women, not to be sexist about it, but it seems to be just a continual deal that I'm constantly trying to wade through and treat. But if you can get that kind of rolling, it helps so many more things. Like, but
100%. And it can affect mood too. The most common thing I see people is, they have constipation or bloating, but it really can affect your mood. And
mm,
so a lot of people will say, well, I'm anxious because I can't go to the bathroom and I'm
mhm,
bloated. And I always tell people, like, I get it. Like, it totally can affect your mood. It can make you just like low energy. You don't want to do anything. You don't even want to eat because you feel so full.
mhm.
And it can have a big toll on mental health. And I still tell people, but you need to treat both at the same time. You don't want to just say, okay, we're just going to treat your gut because that's causing the anxiety or the depression or the low energy. You need to go from both angles to get the best results, is what I've seen.
Yeah. So we were talking, and I was interested about, because your history and your experience being with actually working with an allopathic gastroenterologist for a few years, the way you view this. And again, I don't want to talk too much about GI because I got some other things I want to talk about, but um, you don't do a lot of the major testing. You kind of simplify it, and you've had a lot of success with that. It's not like you're just shooting blind here, but you're not doing a lot of these GI studies. And can talk a little bit about that and how you feel, your the way you think about all that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this kind of gets into the just discussion of like functional medicine testing in general. But um, if somebody comes to see a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor or integrative doctor, they're really thinking, okay, they're going to do a stool test on me if I have any GI issues, meaning like a poop test. You collect your poop, you send it back to the company, and it looks at your gut microbiome. And I've done plenty of those early on in my career, and I pretty quickly realized that they weren't helpful. And when I looked into the research behind them, really a lot of them aren't validated and just don't make sense in my mind. So I'll kind of go through the example of the stool study where you have 100 trillion microorganisms in your microbiome. 100 trillion. It's like inconceivable how many that are there. And some of them are bacteria, some of them are archaea, you've got protozoa, you have all these different viruses even, right? And so you have all these different microorganisms there. And a lot of these stool tests will look at just the species level. So just looking at the species level, meaning E. coli is a species of a bacteria, right?
Mhm.
And we have different species of animals, like a zebra is a species, right? And then we have birds, and there's a bunch of different birds that are there. And what you have to look at the taxonomy to really understand this, but you have the genus, which is going to be Asteraceae for E. coli, and then you have the species, which is Asteraceae coli, E. coli, and then one more level down is the strain level, which would be the most common one that we know is E. coli 0157H7, which causes diarrhea in people and is not super fun. But there's other E. coli's strains that don't cause diarrhea. Like, for instance, E. coli Nissl 1917 is another strain of E. coli that is beneficial to the gut microbiome and actually can be used to treat inflammatory bowel disease as well as constipation. It's used in a probiotic form as a capsule and can be really beneficial for people. And
Hmm.
those are both E. coli's. And so when you look at some of these stool tests, they're just giving the species level, the E. coli. It doesn't tell us who's there still, because if this is E. coli 0157H7 versus E. coli Nissl 1917, two two strains, same species, very different outcomes. And we really need to be talking at the strain level when we're talking about the gut microbiome. And so sometimes they will list the strain, but a lot of times they're still staying at that species level. And within a species, the strains act so differently in terms of how they're interacting with each other and as a community and interacting with our human cells. And so my other big thing with them is I think that they're cherry picking the species even that are there. So we have many, many species of bacteria, and you'll see like they're choosing 20 of them. And I don't think that there's a huge reason for choosing 20 of them. I think that it's likely they're the easiest ones to culture or whatever, method that they're using to actually see who's there. But until we figure out a way to actually look at the gut microbiome, number one, but the biggest thing is even when we know who's there, we still don't know what the ideal gut microbiome is. So, like Kevin, if you look at your fingerprint and you look at Mary's fingerprint, they're totally different, right? And I would never say, oh, Kevin, your fingerprint is terrible. Mine is good, because we know that fingerprints are just different. It doesn't mean good or bad. And the same with the gut microbiome. You can have one person has 1% of relative abundance of one species, and you have another person who has 5% relative abundance. And to date, we don't know which one of those is better for people. There's some things that we do know, right? If you have a certain amount of Clostridium difficile toxin, that you likely will get pseudomembranous colitis, and we don't want that. But
Mm.
other than some of the obvious things that we can easily test for with commercial lab companies like Quest or LabCorp, there's a lot that we don't know. And I can keep going into it, but you kind of get the idea where I just don't think we have the knowledge yet to make clinical decisions based on the gut microbiome. I have no doubts that we will get there. And at that point, I'm excited to run the tests and do the things.
Mm.
But as it stands to date, we just don't know what to do with information, even if we could accurately tell who's there. And I don't think that we can even do that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a small piece of a wider. I mean, you're getting a small population there of the whole picture, and it'll be cool to see what happens with it. I still, maybe it's just because I don't completely understand it totally, but I just still think it's kind of in its infancy. But I'm excited about where it's going in the future.
100%. Yeah,
Throw it,
absolutely. I think we're all excited. I just think that
yeah,
we're getting a little too antsy on it.
throw in some AI, and who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, right.
But um, so I mean, so what do you do with like? So right now you've got, let's say, I'm okay. So I've got a few cases I was going to bring up too. What would you do? You're just going with the story. Say you have a guy that's healthy, active, takes protein, works out, probably drinks too much because his visceral adiposity is a touch high, but but he has frequent loose stools. I know
Yeah.
I see that a bunch in guys, and so you do testing and everything, and you try to increase fiber and do all these things. But how do you? What's a common? I mean, I know you have a concierge practice, really kind of involved. You're very close to these people, and you have athletes and people from all walks of life. I assume we've kind of talked a little bit about that, but do
Yep.
you see that kind of stuff frequently in your practice? Because I'm kind of seeing a ton
For
of that.
sure. For sure, for sure. It's really common. And I think it depends more on like the course of that too, right? Like how often are they, is it weekly? Is it once a month kind of thing?
Right.
But just in general, like I do stool testing. So that person, depending on who they are, especially say they're a hiker, right? They've done through hiking. We're definitely testing for Giardia. It's super common.
Hmm.
But I would send them off just if they have diarrhea, then we'll do Giardia, we'll do stool testing through Quest, maybe even look at a calprotectin for inflammatory markers, but look at all those infectious agents that we know can cause diarrhea. And so we're ruling out things like C. diff and Giardia and, isospora, depending on where they live. And, if they just went to Mexico, like obviously that tells us more, and we probably know which microorganisms are likely going to be there. But so we do the stool testing, and then we do blood work as well. We're ruling out things like hyperthyroidism and just looking at the whole gamut. The most likely case is going to be some sort of irritable bowel syndrome, but who knows? We want to rule out inflammatory bowel disease. So we do a very allopathic workup, I would say, and say, okay, it's not this, it's not that. We do more extensive things because very few people are just wanting the diarrhea. They also want to look at all of their health markers in general. And then we're making sure we're testing for things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which 76% of people with IBS will have one of those being elevated. And then based on whatever comes back, we treat that. So we're treating the individual and what comes back in the testing. But what we're not doing is we're not ordering hundreds or thousands of dollars out of pocket in these, organic acids or stool testing from these companies that aren't covered by insurance. So we can keep everything mostly under an insurance model with PPO insurance for the labs at least, and save people some money so they can spend it on all the other cool things that we learn about in longevity.
How are you testing for SIBO?
We have a couple different methods, but first of all, there's local hospitals will do them. So we have Cedars nearby and we'll sometimes use them. But now there's at-home SIBO testing kits.
Right.
Things like Trio Smart is a company that does them. So that's a very common one that we use. And then there's also devices that you can actually buy and do the testing at home. One of them is called Food Marble. And so just depending on the person, we'll recommend one of those. The Trio Smart does 3 gas testing. So if we're suspecting hydrogen sulfide, then we're much more apt to do that Trio Smart test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use Genova a lot for that, but I'll have to check out Trio Smart. I feel like I'm picking your brain now for my own purposes, so that's fun.
That's all good. Yeah, please.
So I want to switch gears a little bit here because, again, your GI knowledge is pretty profound and everything. So I do encourage anybody to just go crazy and Google Mary. So
appreciate that.
I want to talk to you a few stories. One thing that I thought was kind of cool you were sharing with me before, sailing and head injuries and cognitive behavioral therapy. Those 3 things. Tell me that story, because that's kind of, I just think that's interesting. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, sure. I've actually never told this story on a podcast before, so it's the first time I'll tell it in public. But my family sails for vacations, and one of our sailing trips a few years ago, in sailing, if you're getting ready to get a mooring, you're like rushing around, right? They're like, it's on the left, you like grab this. Especially with my family, it's like yelling and people are arguing. And so with one of those times that we were going into port, I was yelled at and told to go grab something, and I jumped up and slammed my head on the roof, which is what's that material? It's fiberglass. It's like super hard, roof of the boat. Mm-hmm. And didn't think much of it. It hurt. But when you're on a boat, you don't know if you're dizzy or not. So it's kind of hard, and kind of seasick. So like all of the signs of a concussion, I think, can be masked a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure if I got a concussion, but didn't lose consciousness. Later that same day, hit my head again, like just as hard. So 2 hits same day. And that night was the first night I had a panic attack since I had panic attacks. Well, actually, no, it was actually the first panic attack of my life, I would say, was there. I had small little anxiety things when I was a teenager, but I had a full-on panic attack for the first time in my life at the age of 30 something. Mm-hmm. And the following weeks, I would develop my first episode of insomnia in my entire life. Like sleeping had been one of my superpowers and never thought of it. I would lay down, fall asleep. And that quickly went away, and I was plagued with this insomnia that lasted weeks and was really debilitating and took a huge toll on my mental health. Um, and I was super anxious. I was having these panic attacks, but my sleep was going from, I was sleeping from 8 to 9 hours usually to going to 0 to 3 hours for 4 weeks. So pretty severe insomnia. And the anxiety that was created from that was like nothing I had
For
ever experienced.
for 4 weeks.
For 4 weeks. Yeah, it was, I don't know what hell's like, but it was as close to that as I don't understand how people live longer than that with insomnia. And I tried everything. I had, a few psychiatrist friends say, "Oh, try this supplement and this one and do this and this." I was taking medications. I was like, "I'll take anything at this point. I just need to sleep."
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I found cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia that things started to really change. And I was taking medications for sure. Like I needed like everything. I was like, put everything on this. And I met with this wonderful psychiatrist who I've since sent a million people to, who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy. I'll shout her out, Jessica Nord in LA. It's wonderful. And
Who was it?
it was just Dr. Jessica Nord, yeah,
Okay.
out of LA. Yeah, she's great with CBT for insomnia.
Mm.
And that was like a huge pivotal point for me personally because it got me out of this thing, and now I'm sleeping fine and everything's good. No more panic attacks, like the whole thing just completely resolved with sleep. Sleep, it turns out, is very important if you didn't know. I mean, we know that as practitioners, but when you go into sleep deprivation, you're like, oh, wow, it's this important. So
Yeah.
a lot of like sympathy for like those mothers who are postpartum and aren't sleeping, and fathers, all that. Yeah, but CBT is one of those things that I think that as doctors, we should learn in school. And, I was telling you with your ER experience, I feel like every ER doctor should know that because you guys definitely see insomnia episodes of people just like, hey, I need a medication or something. And if somebody had told me, like, hey, try this earlier, oh, would have been a godsend. But we don't learn about that in school. And I think it's essential.
What were some of the tools you learned in like learning CBT that
Yeah.
some of the things that you might do have done at home whenever you're trying to go to sleep or trying to go back to sleep? What were some tricks or tools that you would do?
Yeah, I think it's Forgetting Sarah Marshall is that movie where he's teaching him how to surf or something. And he's like, do less, do less, do less. Like he's like learning how to pop up on a surfboard. He's like, do less. And he's
Yeah.
like, okay, no, you got to do a little bit more than that. That's like sleep, where it's like, it's actually the less you do is usually better if you're having a real sleep issue. The more you think about sleep, like if you're checking your sleep tracker or your Aura ring all the time and you're obsessing about it, sleep can get much worse with that obsession. It's like if you're laying in bed and all you're thinking about is, okay, I need to fall asleep. I need to fall asleep. You're not going to fall asleep, right? We fall asleep when we're thinking about the laundry list or what we need to cook for dinner the next day.
Yeah.
And so that's one really important thing is how can you make this like it's not a big deal when it feels like a really big deal if you're going through a bad episode of insomnia. And so, one thing is don't get into bed until you're sleepy. And this sounds intuitive, but oftentimes when we are sleep deprived or we're going through insomnia, we'll get into bed earlier because we'll say we need to sleep more. We're not sleeping. So let me get into bed at 7:30, but I'm not even tired at 7:30. That's going to increase activation and anxiety exponentially because you're going to get into bed and you'll be like, oh, I can't fall asleep. Well, you can't fall asleep because it's 7:30 and you've never been to bed at 7:30 before. And
Yeah.
so one big thing, it's so simple, is you don't get into bed until you're tired. And that could be 11, 12, 12:30, could be 1, but really waiting until you feel your eyelids are getting heavy is totally fine. And the biggest thing with CBTI is that you have a wake up time and you stay with it. So the wake up time is the anchor point. The bedtime can fluctuate. But say you set your wake up time at 7 a.m. That means that 7 a.m. every single day until you get through the sleep issue, you're waking up no matter if you went to bed at 6 a.m. or 3 a.m. You're still getting up. And what that does is it naturally is going to start to produce a little bit of sleep restriction, which is another tool that you can use in CBT, where it increases your sleep drive. So you have two forces in sleep. One of them is sleep drive, how much you want to go to bed. And then the other one is activation, which can be increased from anxiety or caffeine or Adderall or things like that. But it's those two forces that you're playing with. So in the morning, your sleep drive should be at its lowest. You don't want to go to bed because you just were in bed.
Mm.
And your activation will be at its highest. And throughout the day, those start to go inverse. And by the end of the day, the sleep drive should be the highest and your activation should be the lowest, unless you're really anxious, right? So really anxious people, their activation may be really high and maybe not high enough to overpower their, or maybe too high and overpowers their sleep drive.
Hmm.
And so you're playing with those forces and saying, okay, how can we reduce the activation? You know, does somebody need to be on a medication to reduce the anxiety for a little bit? And how can we increase the sleep drive? And one of the tools to increase sleep drive is sleep restriction, saying like, okay, you're not going to actually sleep that much, so we can get that sleep drive to really increase, to be higher than your activation, so you go to bed the next night. So you may only get 3 hours of sleep one night, but you're still going to wake up at that set wake up time of, I forget what we said, 6 or 7 a.m.
Mm.
And then come the next night, you're super tired because you got 3 hours of sleep that last night. And so once 9 o'clock rolls around, your eyes are heavy, you fall asleep, you sleep maybe through most of the night, you still wake up at that 6 a.m. time. You rinse and repeat, and sometimes we'll put in periods of sleep restriction to create that increase in sleep drive. But I've now sent over, I don't even know how many people for CBTI, and the results are incredible. And it's
Mm.
one of those things where people talk about, oh, take ashwagandha for sleep. If you have real sleep issues, ashwagandha is not going to work. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I think ashwagandha is great. I'm a huge fan of it.
Yeah.
And after 3 weeks of sleep restriction, I'm going to slap somebody if they tell me to take ashwagandha, right? Like, just be real. But this actually works.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm a huge advocate, obviously.
Yeah. I was just telling a patient earlier today that, you can do the supplements, but we got to get the behavioral issues set. But that's really interesting. So CBTI, and
Yeah.
for patients that are looking for that, and it sounds like a lot of people really need that. They look for actual CBTI provider.
Practitioners.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's the VA came out with an app that's free on your phone that has some education around CBTI that you can download. I think they call it CBTI Coach. It's
Yeah.
on iPhone for sure. But find a practitioner who on their website they actually say CBTI, and they're a sleep specialist.
Mhm.
There's therapists out there. There's definitely psychiatrists that know it well.
Mhm.
And that's a great place to start for people.
Mhm. Well, cool. Awesome. I think that's helpful. What I just had I'm having this conversation over and over. A lot of people are waking up in the middle of the night, as long as we're on sleep. A huge thing. I don't know if you see this as well, but people can go to sleep okay, and then they ruminate around 2 or 3 in the morning and can't go back to sleep, kind of thing. And I've got some things that I tell them to do, but I mean, whenever you see that, what do you kind of fall back on? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, do you know like why do you think, like, is this a woman in perimenopause and we're thinking low progesterone? So like checking obviously all those things.
Sure.
And then the other thing is, if we want to pull in some of that CBTI, which I always do, is if it's been more than like 20-ish minutes of you being awake, get out of bed. So don't stay in bed for more than 20-ish minutes. And I say ish because I don't want you looking at a phone, because if you're checking your phone, you're going down the wrong rabbit hole and you're probably not going to fall asleep. But if you feel like it's been more than 20 minutes, get out of bed, go into the other room, grab a book or listen to a boring podcast, hopefully not this one, and and try to get your mind onto something else, because the rumination is increasing that activation. So that's that sleep drive force that is against sleep. So get it on something else. For me personally, I go to TV. And I know like that's a no-no when you
Oh.
talk about like the biohacking sleep world.
Mm.
But I know myself really well, and I trained myself in medical school. If I'm reading, I don't fall asleep because I'd wake up and, study at 3 a.m. And so my brain doesn't shut off when I read. Instead, I either need like an audio book, or I can do really well with like a TV show that I've watched a million times, like Friends is my go-to. And so sometimes I just need like a few minutes of like, okay, I can watch, Joey being stupid on Friends and turn my brain off again. And then when I feel the activation go down and I'm tired, you get back into bed and you try to fall asleep again. And if you're getting into this habit where it's night after night, make sure that wake up time of 6 a.m. or whatever you've set it at, you still keep it, even if you had a poor night's sleep, because that's what's going to get you back on track moving forward.
Mhm. Well, cool. Yeah, what I tell people is after all the other things are under control and, the progesterone or the hormones can be huge, but like stress and everything, I have them go through breathing exercises as well. The 4-7-8
Mm-hmm.
breathing for 4 or 5 rounds of that, and then focus on your breathing and think of 3 things that you're thankful for, regardless how huge or small they are, and to try to bring them back. And then sometimes just giving people, permission that, tonight's my night, not my night. So screw it, whatever. And that's okay too. But setting that early wake up time, or that same wake up time, I think is really imperative. That's cool. But yeah, I thought that
Yep.
was a really cool story about the head injury and the CBTI, and the way you
Cool
were
now. It's cool
well, the
now.
way you were talking about it. Have you not heard of CBTI? It's the greatest
Yeah.
thing ever. But
Well, I mean, I just want like every doctor to know about it so that all their patients get access to it. Because yeah, if you've been through it, it's not fun. And to know that there's something out there that really works for most people is great.
yeah, when and I'm not going to harp on this too much, but like whenever you were going through that severe sleep deprivation for days on end. I mean, you've seen the studies where, they take mice and they cut out their REM and they're like dead in 2 weeks. Or, I mean, it's drastic. And Mother Nature, I mean, why would they allow us to be at a time where we're dormant for like 7 or 8 hours? I mean, we could be, killed by predators and that sort of thing. So, it's a big deal. My question to you, and maybe you said this before, um, what kind of symptoms were you having? Were you like hallucinating, or were you just irritable, or
Yeah, irritable, not the word. I honestly thought I was gonna die.
Mhm.
Like I was having almost a psychedelic experience where I was like, there's no way I'm not going to die right now because I
Mhm.
knew all the negative effects of sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
And it was just so unlike me. I was like, I'm the sleeper. Like how does this change so quickly? And head injuries. I also had like it was a high stress period for me. I think it was a culmination of different things.
Yeah.
But yeah, the anxiety was the most anxiety I've ever experienced in my life. And I've done ayahuasca, I've done other things that are anxiety producing for sure. And this didn't even touch those other things because this was real life. And I really thought like my life was in danger. It was just scary too. I think when you're up, multiple nights, the entire night, and you never fall asleep, it's just it can be a really scary experience for people. And now I'm super grateful that I had that experience because when people come into me and they're like, I'm not sleeping, I understand the weight of it. I'm like, okay, this isn't like, oh, I lost my left shoe. Like, who cares? This is like, okay, we need to really figure this
Mhm.
out because I get it. You can really experience a lot of things, but it was mood stuff for me. So it was extreme anxiety. I was having panic attacks all the time. Um, in terms of hallucinations, wasn't having hallucinations, but definitely some auditory stuff like, oh, what did I just hear? And it was
Mhm.
very bothersome. It was very irritable to me. Like every sound was like nails on a chalkboard. And I started to get some OCD symptoms that were developing with the sleep deprivation. So really obsessing and getting into loop thoughts, and that was very anxiety producing because again, never had experienced any of that before either. And the more I read now about sleep deprivation and what I went through is you can see mental health stuff that has never existed before start to rise when you have sleep deprivation. So if it is OCD, you can definitely develop that in a sleep deprivation mode because your brain is just so susceptible to anything.
Mm-hmm. Think about you being anxious. From the small time that I've known you, you just seem to be pretty even keel. So it's hard to imagine you going through that. So how terrible and wild. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, I mean, you're pretty dialed in on all your stuff. I mean, what's a day look like for Dr. Mary Pardee all day long when you get up and everything? You're very regimented, and your sleep is very, very important to you. And I mean, start the day for me. What's that look like for you? Do you get up, you meditate? What's your thing? What's your deepest, darkest secrets? Let's get into that.
For sure. And I'm going to tell you the complete truth because I go through periods of like meditating and having the perfect morning, and that's not right now. So, my day currently is I wake up, I make my cup of coffee. Usually, I drink mostly decaf. If I'm feeling really crazy, I'll do half calf. And I started drinking my coffee on the couch, looking out our window, and just like watching families walk by and stuff like that. And usually I'll work out in the mornings, so I do a personal training session with my trainer for strength training. Or if it's a cardio day, I'll get on the treadmill and do some cardio. And then I work, and I'm in my office right now, and I have a walking treadmill desk. So I'm not walking because it'll mess up our audio and visual, but usually I'm walking on the treadmill, typing away.
Yeah.
And we just moved, so now we're really close to a state park. So like later today, I'll go for a hike out in the state
Mhm.
park. And in terms of my sleep, I still really prioritize it, but I make sure I don't get into bed until I'm tired. And if I get into bed and I'm not tired, sometimes I'll put a TV episode on and make sure to get tired before I try to actually go to sleep so I don't start to worry about falling asleep.
Right. Just worrying about Rachel and Ross. And that's all you're doing.
Exactly. That's all you need. No, right now
And
I'm watching The Bear. Have you seen that on Hulu?
oh, yeah. That's yeah. I haven't started it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's
Looks
good.
pretty good.
It's good.
Um, well, cool. Any other major issues you deal with, or anything else you've learned in the past 4 to 6 months, let's say? I mean, we went to the conference. Did you take home anything from that different
Yeah, I want to know
that you?
your big takeaways too. The stuff I'm really interested in there was a few things, but I'm going down the protein restriction research, so I'm definitely not capable of having an eloquent conversation about it yet. But like isoleucine restriction, I think is really interesting. So I'm going down that. It's a lot of animal data. Um, and I really like seeing a little bit more human data, but that's kind of currently where my research brain is. And then I'm still like obsessing over fields tests and VO2 max tests. So I'm in a personal just exercise kick myself. So a lot of the research I'm reading is around VO2 max work and lactate thresholds and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah. We
about
do.
you?
Stuff I took. I was interested with the protein restriction too. I don't. It's interesting, but it doesn't. I don't. I'm not convinced how it crosses over to humans because our need to avoid sarcopenia is so
Yeah,
imperative for for lifelong wellness. And everybody that I've seen who's really doing well, and maybe they look younger or they act younger, and then they're 80s or 90, they don't have profound sarcopenia. None of them.
totally.
So, and then all the benefits of lean muscle with cognitive ability and stability and all that stuff. So whenever you talk about protein restriction, it's interesting. And of course, I love all the rapamycin studies and
Hmm.
everything. That's a whole different
Hmm.
conversation. But yeah, so great. So VO2 max, yeah, we're doing that on everybody. And
Hmm.
have you done that test? It's pretty. Pretty fun.
I've done many of them. I used to work in a physiology lab, so I was the subject of many too. But yeah, they're fun for sure. Yeah, but there's so much in the VO2 world where it's like, yeah, there's the test, but there's also all of the research around VO2 max and longevity, and then the other threshold tests too. So like lactate and just looking at how to optimize somebody's training program for longevity. So I'm just digging through a lot
Mhm.
of that stuff.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to bring up at all? Anything else you want to talk about?
No, this has been fun. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's fun. It's good to catch up. What
Yeah.
I guess where do people find you? Dr. Mary Pardee, right?
Yeah, Instagram is at dr.marypardee. That's where I give away a lot of educational content. And then modernmed.com, and it's modrnmed.com. So no E in modern. We have blogs and videos. We have a YouTube channel as well. And we just got onto Apple Podcasts with Modern Wellness Podcast. So yeah, we chat a lot with the other doctors, and a lot of it is around GI, and I'll be doing some solo stuff on longevity too.
Cool. I didn't know you were doing that. Very
Awesome.
cool. Um,
Yeah. Doing it all. Trying.
um, all right. Well, it's awesome to hang out and talk to you. Thanks for making time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll see you at the next conference.
All right. See ya.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us on Apple and Spotify, and please review us to let us know what you think.